2. Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. I enjoyed my little stay out in this guy's hometown of Seattle, Washington. Got up and down. It rained a little bit more than I would have wished it, but that's what they say when they complain. As a tourist in Seattle, he is in Seattle, but watching all things Lamar Jackson. He got the show in person, then on TV. Now he's watched from afar, and I woke up in Cincinnati on Monday morning, and he was writing about it on the touchdown wire at USA Today. He's been my pal for a number of years. He used to work blue on the internet. I loved it. He's NFL_Doug Farrar, and you can find him out at USA Today as well. Man, Lamar Jackson, everybody's writing about Lamar, right? But you sort of have overturned a little unknown fact about pocket awareness and pocket passing and perfect quarterback ratings. They love to tear you down, but even when you're doing it, they still love to tear you down while you're doing it, right, Doug?
Yeah, I didn't work as blue as Lewis Black, by the way. Just so you know.
Thank God for that.
Possible. Huge fan, and as his friend Kathleen Madigan, another that's a nice get. Yeah, I mean, you go back to his time at Louisville. The Bill Polian garbage was obviously the most obvious example of certain stereotypes that quarterbacks just can't get past if they look like Lamar Jackson. And I know Polian to USA Today's Jarrett Bell last week said that he really had to kind of take the whole thing back because, well, Lamar Jackson showed me that no other quarterback has ever been able to play this way before. Completely ignoring, you're a Baltimore guy, Nestor. So you remember a guy named Colin Kaepernick who played your team in a Super Bowl a few years back with a very similar offense. But anyway.
If they just would have handed the ball off on the goal line, I wouldn't have had a book. You know, Harbaugh would have been on the wrong side of Thanksgiving every year. You know, lives would have been changed had that 1 yard gone the other way. It's not lost on me, you know.
But I digress.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, at least for the moment.
Well, Greg Roman's involved, so there's a transition.
Yeah. Well, it's one hell of an offense, and you know, as you mentioned, I've seen it in person. And I got up this morning to do my weekly power rankings, and I'm watching a replay of the Bengals-Ravens game, and I hear Rich Gannon, who's doing color with Kevin Harlan, and Gannon, you know, I have no beef with the guy. I think he's one of the smartest analysts in the business. Certainly was a very smart quarterback for a number of years. And this was right after the touchdown to Mark Andrews, Baltimore's first touchdown. And I hear Rich Gannon say the Ravens do such a good job challenging the launch point for Lamar Jackson. He rarely throws the ball from the pocket. They get him out on the edges. They cut the field in half, and he throws the ball so well and so accurately on the move. Now, there are a number of codes here. The need to cut the field in half means that your quarterback cannot make full field reads, which in Jackson's case is untrue. He rarely throws the ball from the pocket. Massively untrue. He made a ton of huge throws from the pocket against the Bengals. And the Bengals have the worst defense in the NFL, but that's beside the point because it was, tight window throws with anticipation. He's developing as a quarterback. So I have a subscription to Sports Info Solutions, their database, which allows you to see what quarterbacks do in and out of the pocket. And I discovered that Jackson has attempted 240 passes from the pocket this season, completing 134 for 1,611 yards, 10 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. He has more attempts from the pocket than Kirk Cousins, Mitchell Trubisky, or Josh Allen. Now I'm going to give you a list of some quarterbacks who have more throws outside the pocket than Lamar Jackson does. You ready?
Sure.
Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, Gardner Minshew, Carson Wentz, Josh Allen, Derek Carr, Baker Mayfield, Jared Goff, and Matthew Stafford.
And for a variety of reasons. Some because it's designed, some because they're flushed out, some because their offensive line can't protect them. Well, there's a lot of different reasons you would pass from outside of the pocket, right?
Sure. But the lazy narrative to say, well, this guy never, he throws mostly outside the pocket. There's this automatic assumption, and it goes way past Michael Vick. You have to go back to the days of Randall Cunningham, who, when he was with the Eagles, maybe that was true, but, he was the guy behind that Billick season of 98 when they were ringing up every defense they faced until the NFC Championship game. Cunningham had evolved as a passer. He was making a lot of throws from the pocket. So it was, the reason I wrote it was there's this automatic assumption, fence up with your feet, you automatically can't be a pocket passer. And the evidence in Lamar Jackson's case is so far beyond the pale in the other direction, I just had to write about it.
Here's Doug Farrar. He did write about it at Touchdown Wire at USA Today. You can follow him out on Twitter as well at NFL_Doug Farrar. There's so much to unpack on this Lamar Jackson. First thing, I got the Randall Cunningham story wrong about the Whitney Houston thing. And I said that's only interesting to me 30 years later because it feels to me, and I'm around Lamar and the team's around Lamar and everyone, I'm in the locker room, that he's got not a whole lot going on outside of football. He is so football focused. He knows he has otherworldly, God-given ability that he's harnessed with size and speed, and then that pinball play happens, right? The Houdini play.
Oh, God.
That when you just look at his feet and where his feet lands and the torque of his body and trying to stop on a dime, turn his body, and accelerate in another direction, to do that in any sport, in any way, to do that in any sort of athletic pursuit. But when guys are pursuing you in shoulder pads and you've got a football, I think you try to break this stuff down after it's all over. I've compared him to Michael Jordan. Doug, I've been on the radio 30 years. I don't think I've ever compared anybody to Michael Jordan ever, because you just don't do that. But they say one of one. We're talking Randall Cunningham, Michael Vick. Either way, generationally, but there is something about scheming here with Roman, with DaCosta, with the kind of players around them, with these sort of blocking tight ends and blocking H-backs and blocking wide receivers and workhorse running backs and linemen that get out and run block pretty well. But there's really where Jackson has increased his productivity and accuracy, right? Like, so around accuracy is probably everything. It would probably encompass footwork, strength, recognition, film. So all of that happens to have this sort of result where you're having two perfect QB ratings in one season. It really is unheard of, right?
Well, Roethlisberger did it in 2007. I think that was his fourth year in the league. The interesting thing about Jackson, when you go back and you obviously know the history, they, for injury and ineffectiveness reasons, both, they went from Flacco to Jackson halfway through the 2018 season. And in that season, they upped their run percentages massively. I mean, their play calls were right out of like the 1935 Chicago Bears. Here comes Clark Shaughnessy. We're going to run, kind of ended wing T. They didn't throw a lot.
I called it a Navy offense. I said it looked like the metal football game. You remember when you turned it on and the guys would just sort of buzz? It looked like that from watching Joe Flacco for a dozen years.
So that's what they did last year, and where Jackson was at the time. So, you hear these lazy stereotypes about where Lamar Jackson is, and you have to think it's guys who watched the Ravens last year and have not watched the Ravens this year, and all of a sudden you're in a booth and you have to make stuff up. If you look at what the Ravens have done with Jackson as a passer, how they've developed him, how they've helped him along, everything from his footwork, the kind of narrow foot base that did get in his way at Louisville. They've fixed that. They've certainly, with his ability to move his shoulders forward when he does throw on the run, that Andrews touchdown was a good example. He's a better thrower on the run than he was before also, by the way. He's more accurate and more consistent. But they've done a really good job of building him up as a passer in ways that can show on the field. And then you remember, they're doing this with a guy, their primary receiver, Brown, has been struggling with injuries most of the year. They're essentially doing this with three different tight ends and kind of a patchwork receiver group. So the fact that, that's a part of it too. So the multiple running game and certainly the offensive line, I've been saying for the last two, he is the most underrated left tackle in football. Obviously, Marshall Yanda, Orlando Brown has been a great story. But it's the extent to which they committed to where Lamar Jackson was and where they could take him, as opposed to saying, you're not the typical drop back passer. I don't know what to do with you. We're just going to throw you out there and have you fail. And it's interesting, the last time this happened, to this degree, halfway through the season, you replace one kind of offense with another, with a different kind of quarterback. It was Greg Roman, and it was another guy named Harbaugh, and it worked just as well. There are precedents for this, but the extent to which it's worked is almost unseen in NFL history. As far as the running thing, I think Vic was a little more electric. I think Lamar got a little more juke in him, but it would be a Gene Steratore piece of paper between them.
He is Doug Farrar. He is out on the interweb on Twitter. You can follow his tweets at NFL_Doug Farrar. That's Farrar. He has written about Lamar Jackson and about pocket passing and about misconceptions, misperceptions, and mythbusters with Lamar Jackson being a pocket passer. For the improvement for him and for what we're seeing, and this is really an organizational thing, right? Like that they would deal up, that they didn't like him enough to take him where they took Hayden Hurst, but 10 minutes later they thought enough to deal back in to get the extra year. It's been such a deft move in regard to salary cap and the dead money for Flacco and how to be creative around him. But more than that, this full notion of a full commitment to a running quarterback in a way that every head coach, football personnel and college guys would say, you're going to get us all fired. You're going to get us all fired.
It takes a lot of guts. You go back to, again, I'll refer to Greg Roman in San Francisco. When they drafted Kaepernick, and I believe Kaepernick was a second rounder, one of the things Roman did, and this was really smart, he got in the room with Chris Alt, who coached Kaepernick at Nevada, and said, okay, tell me about this pistol offense. Tell me about these, kind of read fakes, elementary RPOs, all these other things. And instead of saying, okay, Kaepernick, we're going to form our box, they sort of created a new box based, again, on what he could do and then where they wanted him to go. And I asked Harbaugh about this in the week leading up to the Ravens-Seahawks game. And it's a simple question. Brother has experience transitioning halfway through a season. Have you talked to him about it? And did that inform the way you've handled Lamar? And he said, yeah, sure. I mean, we talk about it. And, they have their own ideas and they have their own staff and they have their own ways of doing things. But I do think it's a very similar, and I remember talking to Ron Rivera at the Combine years ago about Cam Newton. And he said, one of the things we did is we went back to what he did well at Auburn, and we sort of retrofitted NFL passing concepts on that, but we didn't ask him to do a bunch of stuff he couldn't at the expense of the stuff he could. And that's true with any quarterback. I mean, I remember talking to Russell Wilson in his rookie season, because he ran two-back power at Wisconsin. He ran a West Coast passing offense at North Carolina State. And when he was drafted by the Seahawks in 2012, what did they run? They ran two-back power with the West Coast passing offense. And Wilson laughed and said, the terminology is so similar, half of it I didn't even have to learn. So whether it's Kaepernick or Wilson or, Lamar Jackson or any quarterback, the guys coming out in the 2020 draft, and it looks to be a really great quarterback class, all these guys are going to struggle more than they should have to unless their coaches are adaptable and understand what they can do, understand how to keep them away from really exposing what they can't do too much, and then you build the passer on top of that. And the Ravens have done that perfectly.
Doug Farrar joining us here. They did mention in Cincinnati there's a lot of great quarterbacks in the draft. that was mentioned at some point on Sunday. And, you look at the state of the league right now where the Ravens have moved into this space where we think they're going to play in January and play well and beating up Tom Brady even in the aftermath of what you saw them do in Seattle out there in the rain a couple of weeks ago, which was impressive enough. You said something that I'm hearing a lot of, that I'm feeling, and I wrote about it on the plane flying back, is we maybe never seen this before. I mean, I'm talking Michael Jordan stuff, and I mean, there's RG3 sitting next to him, and I know Redskins fans were talking about that 8 years ago as well. But the way the Ravens have approached this thing, we don't talk about him getting hurt every week anymore, and we don't see him necessarily unnecessarily taking shots. I mean, there is that concern that no one would be able to do this other than him. He's sort of a one of a one, right?
Well, Russell Wilson has never missed a game. Robert Griffin III was fine until Haloti Ngata landed all 340 pounds of himself on Griffin, and I don't know who's going to survive that. That was the worst munch I've seen since Tony Siragusa just demolished Rich Gannon by, trampolining him. I mean, every quarterback's one bad angle away from losing a season or a game or a career or whatever. I can, if you have this type of quarterback, you can't go into it running scared and saying, oh, well, we can only do this and that because we're worried about blah, blah, blah. There are quarterbacks who, and people are, well, what about all that time Vic missed? I've actually seen people say that on Twitter, like, well, yeah, Vic missed a couple years, but it wasn't really because of injury. You might want to hit Wikipedia and look it up. I don't think they're concerned about that. And, you learn how to take hits. You learn how to avoid hits. He's pretty physical about it, but, I think they have it under control.
Well, Doug Farrar joining us here, talking all things Ravens in the aftermath of yet another victory and where this thing goes. So defensive coordinator's trying to stay up late stopping this thing. The Chargers tried it with some sort of 92 defense or whatever it was, running defensive backs all over the field. This is going to come down now for Houston this week and then L.A. next week and San Francisco after that. The Ravens are going to have their own issues defensively with seeing these offenses and just better football teams, quite frankly, the next couple of weeks. But prognosis on this, if you're defensive coordinator and obviously drafting to stop this a little bit more, we're going to see more of it. I mean, more teams are running more elements of this than, let's say, what Matt Ryan's doing lately, right?
Yeah, well, the first thing is you can't play man defense against a guy like this because, and this is borne out. I think it was NFL Next Gen Stats has reported that every team playing the Ravens this year has decreased their percentage of man coverage. And the why is simple. When you play man, you have to turn your back to the quarterback to trail the receiver in that particular coverage. And if you turn your back to Lamar Jackson, that's kind of stupid because then he'll run for 50 yards and make you look bad. Gap control is enormously important. Patriots really over-pursued Jackson, and he made him pay for it. So I don't say you have to play passively, but you can't play to shut him down. You can't play to punish him. You can't play to negate him. He's going to make plays based on his skill level and his role in a really expansive scheme. You have to sort of minimize the damage with a lot of intelligent zone coverage. I think you look to disguise coverage pre-snap, tested his diagnostic skills, and you play gap control. I remember in the 2004 NFC Championship game, Eagles versus Falcons, and Jim Johnson, the Eagles defensive coordinator, he spied gaps. He didn't spy Vic. He spied the gaps to which he would run. And I remember writing about that at Football Outsiders about a decade ago. I think, possibly similar paradigms can be reasonably successful against Lamar. You're not going to stop him. I think there are better ways to at least contain him than we've seen from a lot of defenses. I mean, and the Bengals are they're a dumpster fire on defense. They're awful. It's hard to watch. So, better defenses as they go along, certainly the rest of the season and most definitely into the playoffs. I mean, if they face the Patriots again, that was surprising. I thought Belichick would be a little more up on what to do, but they got undressed by some really elementary option stuff, and that surprised me.
Doug, the thing about this is you say stopping it or containing it wherever it is. The down and distance is staggering, right? Like, that was the story to me last November and December, even in the bumper car offense they were running last year, which is how many times you dust off and you're in 2nd and 2 and 2nd and 3. And just the analytics of 2nd and 2 and 2nd and 3 and 2nd and 4, and how rarely, and this goes back to, Brian Billick talking about Barry Sanders 20 years ago, which is, sometimes he breaks one, but a lot of times you're in 2nd and 14, and 2nd and 14 is a punt. 2nd and 14 is a lost possession of the ball, and playing the analytics of 2nd and 3 and 2nd and 4, it really is astonishing. I sat in the upper deck last week here, as I do at home every week, and someone got real bummed out when Ingram got 5 yards on first down. They're like, my God, we're in 2nd and 5. What are we going to do? And I'm thinking, we spent 12 years where 2nd and 5 was a really good down and distance,
Sure. Yeah. Well, it is a big part of their offense, and that's as much, it's certainly Ingram who benefits from Jackson as vice versa. It's all their pre-snap movement. And I think, again, going back to what you do as a defensive coordinator, the Rams did a lot of backfield motion last year, and then the Lions were the team that stopped biting on it, and everyone else stopped biting on it, and now you have the Rams of today, which is not so good.
Oh, yeah.
I think teams have to be a little less prone to biting on everything, trying to attack everything. Again, I think if you want to at least hold this thing in containment, you really have to play, again, not passively, not reactively, but intelligently to say, okay, there's a lot going on here, but it isn't like 17 things. It's like 5 or 6. So even if we don't hit every read, let's not over pursue. I mean, Pete Carroll talked about, we have to play gap control. We have to play gap control. And then Jadeveon Clowney's out there trying to chase Jackson like a dog trying to chase a fire truck. It was just ridiculous. So everyone's talking about how to do it, but no one really is, which is kind of interesting.
Last thing for you, golf and playing the Steelers, and I watched that into the evening from Covington, Kentucky on the other side. But they had a good election last week, Doug. I did want to point that out because we didn't.
Indeed, that was very nice.
We haven't mentioned the 5-letter word, and I'm not going to do that at this point. But in watching the Steelers, they're sort of the snakefish of the NFL, right? Like they sort of never go away. I mean, I said to somebody this week, watch them be the team that comes in here second week of January after the bye. They're not done, and Mason Rudolph aside, they're never done.
Well, I wrote about this last week, the trade for Minkah Fitzpatrick. And you can include Earl Thomas in here. You can include Devin McCourty. Justin Simmons for the Broncos has been really, really good. But when they traded for Minkah Fitzpatrick, who played primarily in the slot for the Dolphins, and they moved him to deep safety, which he really hadn't played that much, I think, even at Alabama. And ever since then, Fitzpatrick has been one of the best deep safeties in the NFL. He has more interceptions than any other deep safety. His passer rating allowed is about equivalent to what Earl Thomas is allowed. It's in the high 30s. And last time I checked, Earl Thomas is pretty good. So their defense has really come around. It's been a great coaching job by Keith Butler and primarily Terrell Austin, their first-year secondary coach, who has been a talent for a long time. They're getting James Conner back. I mean, Mason Rudolph is what he is. I think, they lost their first-round pick for Fitzpatrick, which is why everyone panned the move. But without Minkah, they're not even in the playoff discussion. We're not talking about them right now. That's how big that trade was.
Doug, always appreciate your work, and I appreciate your time. It was good seeing you out in Seattle, albeit too briefly. It's a good town you got out there, man. I won't spread the word, and everybody will come out there and mess it all up, all right?
Yeah, don't spread the word on the radio or anything.
Take care of yourself. Great work on Lamar. I'll be spreading the word about that. Thanks for coming on, man.
All right, take care, man.
Doug Farrar doing a great piece out on Touchdown Wire. You can find it Touchdown Wire USA Today. He is their insider on the NFL. I saw him out in Seattle, but no one covers the league better in the X's and O's. The Genius of Desperation as well, his book. He's an NFL editor. NFL_Doug Farrar. I will share the piece. I already did share. I shared it from the airplane on Monday morning about this assumption that Lamar Jackson can't be a pocket passer. Doug Farrar writes that he already is, and that's not an opinion, that's science. So's global warming, but I'm trying to get that through to 38% of you. Nasty at WNST.net, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook. Don't forget, my man Matt Skur is going to join us on Tuesday night. We're at Jennings Cafe. We're looking forward to seeing you 7:30 p.m. We're coming to the Ville with the first place Ravens and Matt Skur, who snaps the ball to Lamar Jackson and blocks for him last I checked. Don't forget, any breaking news happens first on our WNST Tech Service. It's all brought to you by our friends at Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis Colazzos with the newly titled yet aptly titled Dennis Colazzo Show from 3 until 5 on Thursdays here at WNST, and heard again on Sunday mornings as well. His new Twitter is The Colazzo Show. And, of course, the Tech Service, 13 years now into giving you the breaking news and everything that's happening. I would not hold my breath on any Orioles news happening, but such is life in November around here. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 at WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.